Okay, good morning everybody, or good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. In Australia, it is very early in the morning, about 6 a.m, so we are up bright and early to help you navigate through the new stuff that's in Octopus Deploy 3.4. Who you've got with you today, my name's Damien Brady. I'm a solution architect here, but I'm also responsible for the community and partner management. And joining me as well is Mike Noonan, who's also a solution architect, which seems to be our catch-all position, but he's one of the main guys responsible for Octopus 3.4. So he's going to be running through a bit of a demo of all of the stuff that we've got in Octopus 3.4. So thanks, Mike, for getting up early as well.
Morning everybody, good to hear from you and see you.
All right, so what are we going to go on about today? So there's a lot of stuff in Octopus Deploy 3.4. We're going to try and hit as many as possible, but we are conscious of time. So hopefully we'll get to questions as they come up. If you do have questions on the way through, please use the question tool in GoToWebinar. And if you have to leave early or you've got colleagues who have missed this, we're going to record it, or it is recording right now, and we'll put that online and tweet out some links and things like that as well. So today we're going to go through a few things. The big ticket items in 3.4 obviously are multi-tenant deployments, so we'll have a look at those. And then a better support for elastic and transient environments as well. We're going to have a look at some things like cloud regions, F# script support, proxy support for Tentacles, which is something we've added recently as well, and some things like NuGet 3, Semver 2.0.0 of course, and a few other things as well as we go through. So just so we don't run out of time, I'm going to hand this over to Mike, who might run through a couple of demos. And Mike, if you can steal the screen from me.
I'm going to do my best. And I've got to find, there's so many attendees here now, this is great. So I'm just going to find me. Okay, so my screen should be coming through. I've installed a few different Octopus instances on my test server here, and this first one is pretty much vanilla, pretty much the simplest project you could possibly have with a really simple process that runs a script on the Octopus server. And we should probably just go through how you get started with multi-tenant deployments. The very first thing you need to do is actually toggle the feature on. The reason we've done this is one of the first features where we've added a feature toggle to the application. And the reason we did it was because it's going to introduce Tenant Tab at the top of our screen. And typically with Octopus, we don't want to overload concepts onto our customer base unless they're actually using those concepts. So we're going to turn that on now, and we'll reload the screen, and you'll notice the tenant tab's arrived. So we get a few little breadcrumbs hinting us through to go and create our first tenant. We'll do that, and a nice little introduction screen that shows you some of the things you get to do with tenants. So you can jump into our documentation where we've got a really nice guide that'll take you through some of the more advanced topics and introduce them to you a step at a time, because as we developed multi-tenant deployments, we realized just how invasive it is and how many areas that you're probably already used to in Octopus. It kind of touches and tweaks in little subtle ways. So we'll create our first tenant, and of course I'm going to call this Mike because I'm good at typing Mike and I don't make too many mistakes. Now this might be a customer, it might be an internal tester, it could be me in this case. And the very next thing you need to do is connect your tenants to projects and environments so you can actually deploy them. So here's my project. And this little pop-up here has told me something interesting, that each project has an opportunity to opt in or opt out of multi-tenant deployments in certain ways. So just as a bit of a shortcut to help you on board, we've made a little helper button there that if you can edit the project, it'll configure the project for you, and it's gone and done that. And now this tenant is connected to my project and it will deploy into the production environment. So at the very top level, you've got Octopus, you've got projects, you've got environments, and we introduce tenants as basically, some people call it a third dimension. I like to think of it as whenever you want to have multiple deployments in a single environment, that's where you can start introducing tenants and making use of that. And that's why tenants is so pervasive through the system. So really quickly pushing on, we could add some variables. There are no variable templates yet that are telling the tenant to add some variables. We'll go into that later, but really quickly jump into my project, and now you can see that the mic tenant has been added, and there's this concept of an untenanted deployment. The reason that that's showing there is because this is an Octopus project I've upgraded, and I've taken sort of a slipstream approach to this in that I'm going to continue allowing untenanted deployments, which is like good old Octopus where tenants didn't exist, and then I'm going to up-level this project and become a tenanted project. And so I'll just quickly go through that setting now. This is the multi-tenant deployment setting that we've introduced for the project system, and where every project starts by default is all of the tenanted features are disabled, and when I added my first tenant to this project, it up-leveled the project to allow it to be in a hybrid mode where we allow tenanted and untenanted deployments. And then after that, if you decide that this is a fully tenanted project and we should never allow untenanted deployments, you can turn that up and dial up to a higher level where you require tenants for all deployments.
So just a really quick thing and a point to highlight there especially is if you're not using tenants in your application, and we might actually define what that means in a second too, but if you're not using the multi-tenant feature, it's going to be completely out of your way until you switch it on.
That's right, yeah, and you won't notice anything leaking through. If you do, let us know about it, because it's really important for us to introduce concepts into Octopus only when you actually use them.
So speaking of the concept of tenant, for those who aren't really familiar with the concept of a tenant, can you kind of give us a bit of an explanation of what a tenant would mean? Like what's a multi-tenant deployment?
It is interesting because a lot of customers we speak to end up thinking of tenants in slightly different ways. And so they'll talk about true multi-tenancy and pseudo multi-tenancy. In an Octopus world, a tenant is kind of like just a slice of an environment. So what we find is that people often end up with environments that mimic tenants in some way. So this is our demo server. And one of the things that we have on a demo server is dev, test, acceptance, beta, production, production AU, production US environments. Now, we also have this concept here of, well, I can't find it very well in this demo, but they might have two environments that mimic two different UAT environments, UAT1 and UAT2. And those environments are usually a way to have feature branch deployments into those pseudo environments. What would be really nice there is actually to turn those into tenants, so you can have independent instances of your applications deployed into the same environment. So that way you can sort of collapse your environments back down and just have a test environment that has multiple instances deployed into it. And so from an Octopus point of view, a tenant is just a slice of an environment. So for some people that might mean that you've got multiple tenants deployed onto the same machine or their applications shared on the machine. You can also do dedicated hosting where you have a single tenant's applications deployed onto a farm of machines, but it's isolated to just that tenant. Some people will just equate a tenant to a customer. So there's lots of different ways you can sort of leverage the tenant feature in Octopus, and for you it might mean a different thing in your world.
So in a lot of cases what I've seen is that people will use it for an application that gets deployed to a lot of different customers of theirs. So maybe it's a hosted CMS or something like that, but they're deploying the same application to a number of different tenants. It's just that you can group those tenants in terms of, you know, whether it's a hosted server, whether it's a shared database, whether it lives in the US or in Australia and things like that.
Yeah, that's right. It's a really convenient way to work with a lot of customers, and so we've really based a lot of the fundamentals of the multi-tenant deployments around that kind of concept. Where you've either started out with SaaS in mind, or you've started a project internally for your company, but it sort of became really popular and grew, and other people want to use it as well, and so you started on selling that, maybe white labeling it along the way. And so here, in the sample that we've sort of been driving out, mainly for developing this and making sure we scale well, is a whole bunch of tenants here. And these tenants different. We've categorized them using the idea of tenant tags, and so this is sort of up to you to decide on what tags make sense to you. And so from experience, we've taken a few ideas around identifying tenants by their type, whether they're internal customers or external customers, what kind of importance we're going to place on them, when and where we're going to upgrade them. So we might have some early adopters and others that have decided they only want stable, well-tested releases, even down to the degree of looking at their hosting. And so that gives us a chance to search on those, so we can click on one of these tags here and see that these are all of the customers or tenants that are hosted on what we've called Shared Farm 1. And so in our environment world, we've got a whole bunch of cloud servers, cloud regions here in this case is a convenient way to test. But you can see in the production environment, we've got a whole bunch of shared nodes. And so this is one of the nodes from Shared Farm 1. And we've identified that by marking it with the same tenant tag that we mentioned before. And so this server will become a part of Shared Farm 1. And when deployments for those tenants go out, those tenants with matching tags will be deployed onto those servers. A similar thing you can also do with dedicated hosting. And we'll go into that if we have time. So across to our dashboard, and I can show you this quickly and then we can look at some more questions. Here's an example of where we're working with a whole lot of tenants, and this is the project overview now that you've started using tenants and you've up-leveled your project. And so one of the things we're doing here is you'll notice we've got 1.4.0 rolling through as an update to our application, and there's a whole bunch of environments here that before, if you were doing an environment per tenant, you would have had probably 60 or 70 of these environments rolling across and scrolling horizontally. But now we've introduced tenants as another dimension. We're scrolling down and we can do a lot of interesting things with this. One of the things I'll point out is because we've added this upgrade ring tag, we can now create a group on this dashboard and look at what we've done. We've deployed an untenanted release into our sort of CI or dev environment to make sure that that's working. And then our testers have been busily testing 1.4.0, but we haven't yet rolled it out to any of our actual external customers. And what we've got here is a group of early adopters. And so a nice thing that we can do about this is choose our 1.4.0 release. And because we're grouped by this upgrade ring, we can actually go and deploy to all of these customers all at once. And so there's our 6 matching early adopters. We could also go in here and change those tenants and change that filter if we wanted to. I'm just going to use that straight up and deploy to them. And one of the important things to understand about multi-tenant deployments in Octopus is that there's one deployment per tenant, an environment. And so some people have talked about mixing and matching, so being able to deploy with one deployment, deploy to lots of tenants, but that really overcomplicates the deployment and the variable system, and so we've really stuck down to a deployment per tenant. And there we go, I've upgraded the staging environment for some of our early adopters to 1.4.0. And that's something I'll call out as well, is that you can really easily build up these tenant-aware lifecycles. And so the idea is that I might want some of my VIPs to have a test environment that I deploy into first, and then they sign off, and then we promote to their production environment. And so we shouldn't be able to skip straight ahead to the production environment for those tenants.
Cool. I might just pick up, we've had a couple of little questions. One was, can you assign a Tentacle machine to a tenant at Tentacle installation time? And the answer would probably be...
Yes, you can.
Oh, okay,
yeah.
all right. And
yeah,
I answered no, and so I'm wrong.
That became an important thing around auto deployments, because we use an eventing system that really quickly picks up on new machines that are being added, and if you've added deployment triggers or project triggers and we'll do an auto deployment, you want to make sure the right projects are deployed. So we've made a really important first step, is that when you register a Tentacle, you can choose the tenants or tenant tags that Tentacle belongs to, and the same for any of your different deployment targets.
Okay, cool. So the other question was really just about tenanted deployments being leveraged to reduce or eliminate the need for step templates from Michael. He says that it seems very much like if you were using step templates before, and I assume with multiple projects, so you could deploy the same project to multiple people using a step template, then now you don't really need to if you can separate them into tenants to the same deployment
Yeah, that's right. You should find that by introducing tenants into your deployment processes, you could either collapse down the number of projects that you've created, the number of environments that you've created, or even the number of step templates you're using. So we really should be thinking out of the box a little bit with tenants, and you might find that you can really simplify any duplication you've currently got in your Octopus system.
Just one final question as well from Stephen. Is a tenant a person or an app? Or can it be an app versus a person? So if an app team has multiple applications, each of those applications would be a tenant. I think the general idea behind tenants is your project still is maintained. It's still one project or one app that you are deploying the same way as before. It just means you can group your tenants into either multiple customers or groups of individual users if that's how you deploy your application.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I would suggest that projects are still the right way to model different applications, and then your tenants are multiple deployments of those applications. We'll actually show a demo a little bit later on, hopefully towards the end if we get time, where we use tenants as a way to see what's going on in individual machines, and I think that'll be really interesting for some people.
Cool. So one thing I just wanted to raise as well, so the variables here, obviously if you're deploying to different tenants, there's a complication or an additional consideration with variables. Can you talk about the variables a little bit?
Yeah, I can do that quickly. So if we look at the variables tab for this example, it's obscenely small. Now, in real life, you're probably going to have a few more configuration settings than this, but one of the things that I've noticed on other customers' sites is that they'll either have all of their project variables in here for their tenants, and then over time they'll start to move them into library variable sets and create a library variable set that encapsulates all of the variables for that tenant. But then you have to go to the variable set and make sure it's scoped properly to the environment that was pretending to be a tenant. What we can do now is create these project variable templates, or I'll call them variable templates because you can also define them at different levels with different levels of variability. So for example here, we've said that every tenant that's connected to this project has to have a provider variable for the database name. Similarly for the database username, password, and a domain name that will be used for accessing the web application. Now what this does is it says to Octopus, please require a variable value from each of the tenants that are connected to this project. And in this case, we require one value per environment that they're going to be deployed into as well, because it makes sense that if I'm having a tenant deployed into multiple environments, I'm going to use a different database for them because they're going to be testing in one of their environments and then working in production in the other environment. So that's what happens when we create one of these variable templates, and one of the things you can see here is that I've created that variable template with a default value, and so if you don't specify one on the tenant, it'll be treated as the value. And one of the other more advanced things that you can do with Octopus is sort of multiple levels of variable bindings. And so what we've done here is created the database name with a default of Ultimize being the project name, dash environment alias, which I'll show you in a moment, and then tenant alias. So environment alias is a way that I can create a URI-friendly version of the environment. So I'll go through to the library variable sets quickly and show you those. Here in the environment variables library variable set, I've created this environment.alias variable that's scoped to each of our environments, and because I have spaces and things in them, I've just sort of reduced those down to URI-friendly versions. And also, we've got a standard tenant details one. And here there's no variables in that set, but we have variable templates. And the idea behind this is that you can create like a custom field for your tenants where we have a constant value that's shared amongst all of the projects and environments the tenant will be deployed into. And so here we've created one called tenant.alias. We can also choose the region that they're going to be deployed into because this is a cloud-hosted app, or create a contact email. And so if we zip across to the tenant space, and look at somebody like Alvin Warren, who's a VIP in our world, and he has two environments here, staging and production. If we look at the variables, you can see that we've got the common variables we defined in that standard tenant library variable set, and there's a handy link there to jump across to it if you can view those variable sets. And here we've chosen Southeast Asia using a drop-down, and just turn that back, otherwise I might blow things up. And there's the contact email that will be used if we wanted to send an update notification to them. But if we go to the project variable space, let's discard those changes I made, and load that up, you can see here all of the projects that Alvin is connected to. And if we just filter down to Ultimize, so we can focus on that, you'll see that we've done a little bit of responsive work here with the UI so we can show staging and production side by side, and you can actually compare these sort of left and right as a bit of a convenience. Now, by default, the database name here is being set like we said it should in our template. But at any time, an example here is that if one of the customers decides to pay you more money so they can have a custom domain name, we might be able to say this is going to be alvin.myapp.com, and then save that off, and that'll become the variable that's used on the very next deployment that rolls through. So I think one important note I'll make here is we did talk about the idea of what's going to happen with snapshots in Octopus, and I'll just call out, don't fear, nothing's changed. As we introduce tenants, though, we realised that we really shouldn't be snapshotting tenant variables, and so that's one of the sort of caveats that's good to be aware of, is that tenant variables are live, and the main reason for that is so that you don't have to create new releases or play with variable snapshots if you're adding or removing tenants or changing tenant variables or fixing problems with tenant variables on the way through.
Okay, cool. Just before we move on, so I'm conscious of time as well, and I know these are the major ticket items, but a couple of questions just before we move on. So one was that does each tenant need its own tentacle, or do they share a single instance?
Yeah, I pointed that out just briefly before, and I'll make a bit more of a note of it. You've got different ways you can leverage the tag system that we're building within Octopus now. And so I showed you earlier there's this shared farm concept in our demo. And so what we've done here is that we've added this node. It's a cloud region, so just ignore that. Imagine it's a tentacle. We've connected it to the production environment, we've given it the role web server, and we've tagged it with this special tag here, shared farm 1. Now that's a tag we've created on our own, but we're using it with purpose. And so what we do is we say any of our tenants that we want to be deployed onto shared farm 1, we will also tag with that exact same tag. And so when you do a deployment of a project, we calculate which machines should be included into the deployments, and we use those tags to figure it out. So if I go to an example now, I'll go back to our environment screen. If we look down in our production environment, that same VIP customer, Alvin Warren, has 2 hosts to be highly available because we do a rolling deployment out to those. And in this case here, that's just a name. But what we have done is we've specifically added that tenant, Alvin Warren, to this deployment target. So now that tentacle will only ever be used by deployments for Alvin Warren, which is a really good way to add sort of a dedicated hosting concept to your deployments.
Yep. So yeah, in short, you can share those tentacles across multiple tenants. You can tag them for individual people, even tenant groups and tags and things like that.
That's right, yeah.
Okay, cool. The next question was about variable templates. If you don't have the multi-tenant feature turned on, do you still get the variable templates?
You don't. We've introduced the idea of variable templates for tenants as a way to introduce the concept into Octopus and see if it makes sense in other areas as well. So at the moment, you don't get variable templates until you've actually turned on the tenant feature, because the only place where Octopus expects to find variable values for those templates is tenants at the moment. We do have sort of conversations at the moment also when we're designing the feature around variables being defined where they vary. So it's a bit of a mouthful, but there's some of those things that the tenant alias, that varies by tenant, and some of them vary by kind of tenant and environment, and we want to enable that. But imagine a situation where you've got deployment targets where you need a variable that defines where a data drive is, and that might change depending on which target you're deploying to. So you might be using hosted VMs where some of them have a Z drive for local data and some of them have a D drive. And so you want to define that where it varies. And so at the moment in Octopus you have to define that on the project or at a library variable set level and then scope it correctly. But it'd be really nice to be able to define that actually on the variable, where the variable varies on the deployment target itself. And so we do have sort of loose plans that if this is a good idea and it floats really well in 3.4, that we'll introduce it to other areas as well. And you can imagine that extending to environments as well.
Okay. I'm getting a few questions around, I think around usage, so maybe it's worthwhile. I remember when we introduced the channels feature, there was a blog post that we did that was fairly long, that you did I think, it was fairly long about the different scenarios that could solve.
Yep.
For questions about how multi-tenant deployments works and some scenarios where it might work, maybe it's worthwhile scheduling a blog post at some point to show some of those scenarios, just to hit a lot of these questions.
Yeah, that's a good idea. We have talked about that internally as well, because a few people have said, I'm not interested in multi-tenancy in Octopus 3.4, hurry up and give me other stuff. And I think that every development shop could benefit in some way from using tenants, even if it is just to provide isolated testing environments, or some people are calling them Phoenix feature branch environments, where they live for a short time and die shortly after, and tenants can be a really good way to model that. But yeah, we've got a few blog posts already in the can that we want to ship out in the next few weeks explaining some of those scenarios.
Okay.
The other thing I'll call out is that if you go to the Octopus documentation and look under our guides section, there's an entire guide that we're still fleshing out the last details to, but that takes you through step by step and shows off some of the scenarios that you could use.
Okay, cool. I might just move on because we're nearly halfway through and we've only hit one of our many different items. There's a few more questions. I'll try to answer them in chat, or at least defer them until I have an answer, because I'm not really the expert on this. So we might move on. So one of the other things, the other major things that we've got in 3.4 is the idea of elastic and transient environments. So could you talk a little bit about that, how that works?
Yeah, for sure. It sort of started as two checkboxes, and we have a bit of a giggle about that internally, because we thought that dealing with machines that go away was kind of easy, because we could recognise when they've gone away and failed health checks for a while, and we have a checkbox that just says clean them up. And then we thought we'd have another checkbox that said, well, if a new machine arrives, then we should deploy all the right versions of the right projects onto them. And we have a bit of a laugh, because we sort of thought that'd be a few weeks' work, and then as any good plan, that went out the window as soon as the first gunshots were fired. And so that ended up being a really involved and deep feature that grew into the two concepts at the end, well, two and a half. Some configuration features on projects that let you be a little bit more tolerant about machines that go away during a deployment. And then two major features, and I'll jump into those really quickly and cycle over them. We can talk about them a bit. The first one is machine policies. And so machine policies are now a thing you can use in Octopus that out of the box, and I'm inside of our demo server at the moment, we only have one machine policy, and this is the default machine policy, which you will see arrive when you update to Octopus 3.4. Pardon me. And this mimics what Octopus did out of the box up until now. So now you can control it though. You can change the time between health checks at the moment, and out of the box with Octopus that's an hour between health checks. And if you have a particular set of machines where you want to run health checks more frequently, one of the reasons might be that you're auto deploying to them, or you expect them to be transient machines, then you can dial that down and make it a lot faster. Or if you've got machines, or you've got a lot of machines you're working with and you want to improve the performance of your Octopus server, you might dial that up and say just do a health check once a day. And one of the reasons you can do that is because you've now got a health check step within your project that you can incorporate. So that way you can really say, don't do very many automatic health checks, but do a health check before I deploy any of my projects. You can also customize the scripts that we use for health checks themselves. And some of the nice things there is that if you've decided that 5 gigabytes is too big a free space, you can set that down and just easily say 250 megabytes might be enough.
So with this, you're basically able to check anything you like with the target machines.
Yeah, that's right. And you can do it on Linux machines or across an SSH endpoint, which might be one day on Windows as well. But yeah, using PowerShell or Bash scripting. And so you could delete the script that we use for 3 disk space threshold. You could leave it in there and add your own checks. You can very easily write information out as well here. So if I say write warning and put my own warning in there, what will happen is that when the health checks run on these machines, you can detect warning or error states on the machine. And so I see some people are going to use this with a PowerShell DSC, where they might be looking for DSC drift and be able to write warnings about that or raise errors and different things like that. So you could look to make sure that in this particular set of machines that IIS is installed and running.
Yep, perfect. So this has implications as well when when you're scaling up and scaling down, essentially.
Yeah, so machine policies really come into effect when you're scaling down. So if you take an AWS auto scale event in an auto scale group where you're doing a scale down event and machines start to go away, they become terminated. One of the things we love to do is have tighter integration with immediate notifications of those going away, and we know a lot of people use AWS Lambda to call into Octopus to actually delete the machines. But at the lowest common denominator, the best thing we can do at the moment is just when we run health checks, if we notice that the machines are non-contactable, we call it available or unavailable. If they're unavailable for a certain amount of time, we'll automatically delete that machine registration from Octopus, and that way it's sort of not cluttering up your environment. So if you've worked with a transient environment before in Octopus before 3.4, this was a real pain because you'd end up with machines that no longer existed, blocking deployments to machines that do exist. And so that's something you can do here is automatically clean those up. And you can sort of say how long, how tolerant you want to be of these machines becoming unavailable. So if you know you're working in a highly transient environment, you might set that down to 5 minutes. But there's something to be aware of there is that if you do delete machines, they are gone. And so the only way to get them back is re-add them. And one of the things that is interesting there is that might sound scary and crazy to some people, but if you're working in this kind of transient auto-scaling environment, there's a pretty good chance you'll be able to just remove that machine and stand a new one up.
Yeah. So this has implications as well for if you're deploying desktop applications, so machines that aren't always around.
Yeah, and we'll show us sort of an example that mimics that a little bit later on.
Yep.
But that's absolutely right. It's not just for auto-scaling web farms, and I might jump in and show you that now.
Yeah.
Just actually one other thing I call them machine policies. You can actually set policies around when Calamari and Tentacle updates should occur, and so you can basically turn your Octopus server and all of your machines that you add that particular policy to into a hands-off kind of situation. You upgrade Octopus and it'll automatically roll out Tentacle for you.
Okay. So the scaling example, that's what you're going into now.
I'll jump into the scaling example. Is that
Yeah, absolutely. So for those who are using 3.3 or earlier, you'd know that if you can't get to a machine, or if a machine disappears and reappears and things like that, it kind of blocks your deployment until you sort out that environment or that machine again, until it either connects or you remove it or disable it or something like that. So this kind of solves that issue.
Yeah, it really solves that problem. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, so in the project, sort of in the process area, we've added this setting here called machine connectivity settings. And so by default, again, there's no change to anybody out of the box, but what you can say now is skip machines if they become unavailable. And one of the reasons for this is we see cases where customers have a scale down event during a deployment, and that can blow up the whole deployment and cause real issues. And so what you can say here is based on the web server machine being a web server role, we're very happy to skip that if the machine becomes unavailable during a deployment, and so that'll help you keep your deployments green. Another thing that you can do now is, this is the flip side of the auto scale or the scale up event, is project triggers, and so this is where the other checkbox kind of evolved into, is the very first of what we see being a series of different triggers you can create in your project. And so right now I'm going to say we're going to have an auto scale trigger. And if an existing deployment changes state, deployment target changes state, means if a machine becomes healthy, what else is there? You undisable it, is that the right way to say it? It's a positive event on the machine. If we add this event here, new deployment target becomes available, it basically means when a machine actually just gets registered, as soon as we recognize that, we're going to deploy the right things to it for this project. So there's two options there. We kind of see that this will give you a bit better abilities to tune these events over time. But the idea is at the end of the day that you could say a new machine comes online and a health check is run to make sure that IIS is set up because of DSC or some other dependency. This is the one you would choose, because now we've become healthy. We would say in any environment where you can choose which environments you want to filter this trigger to, if the machine is a web server or on the web server role, this is what's going to happen. We'll give an auto deploy, and if you do this at the moment, and there's some good talks around the web, if you're at NDC Sydney recently, Domain group gave a talk about their robot army, and what they have to do is a bunch of PowerShell scripting to query the Octopus API to figure out which deployments should be deployed onto the brand new machine. And so with Octopus 3.4, you don't need to do that anymore. We take care of it for you because we also take into account tenants that might be hosted on the machine as well, and which deployments need to be, or which releases need to be deployed on that machine to bring it up to scratch and make it just like its brothers and sisters. And so by the time I save this off, we've now done all of that scripting. When the machine becomes available and becomes healthy, we're going to automatically deploy the right version of our application onto that server. And so if we look at our dashboard, this is the hint for you, is that what you see is what you get. So in the production environment, we're going to roll out 3.2.14.688 to any new servers that come online, and that'll take care of our auto-scale events.
Cool. So kind of in summary of that, there's the machine policies which say if a machine is unavailable for a long period of time, which would represent potentially a scaled down event, then just remove that so we don't have to worry about cleaning those up.
Yep.
And unlike 3.3 and below, that's not going to block a deployment if you set up what you demonstrated in the second one, which is the checkbox to say it's okay if machines are offline.
That's right.
A question from Ryan as well. What happens if every machine in an environment is offline?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. At the moment, I think if you are really permissive, like you dial up the permissiveness, it's going to look like a green deployment to no machines. That's probably something worth trying out, and if that's a problem for you, get in touch with us.
Yep. Okay. Cool. Sorry to throw you in the deep end there.
That was a good one. Yeah.
Yeah. And the other side of it as well is a scale-up event with the project triggers. So when something becomes available, it's going to actually trigger a new deployment. And those deployments get grouped as well, right? You can see if you go into that deployment that you were showing of 3.2.14688, for example, if there were multiple events after the fact, that's all going to be in the same process log.
Yeah, so you go into the same process log and you can see machines being added to that over time. And I'll show that in the demo when we get to it.
Yep. So another question from Jacob. If I spin up two machines and they both trigger to get the latest deployments, will the first machine's initial deployment block the second's initial deployment?
Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah, because there are circumstances where Octopus will sort of limit the number of deployments it'll do to a particular environment of a project. And there's no way to control that at the moment. So what we do is that auto-deploy works on sort of an event sourcing model because it works really good with high availability clusters of Octopus. And so one of the things you can use is the audit log to figure out what's going on. I'll jump into diagnostics really quickly. There are new tabs in here for auto-deploy and machine cleanup. And if we look at this, when you've got triggers enabled and things, it'll actually tell you information about what's going on around auto-deploy. But an interesting piece of this is in the audit logs, which are basically all of the events that we log through Octopus. You can see here that project trigger was created, and then as machines get added and removed, and auto-deploy makes decisions to either not auto-deploy or to auto-deploy to some machines, you'll see those come up in the audit logs. But what we do is with auto-deploy, there's a scheduled task that runs. I think it's about every 30 seconds to figure out what events have occurred since it last scanned the event log and looks for machines that have come online. So if you bring a bunch of machines online and they fall within that same window, they'll all be deployed to in one hit, in one deployment. But if you sort of cross those windows and you get 3 machines come online in one window and 2 in the next, you'll deploy to the first 3 machines and then the second 2 machines. Yep. And so what we recommend is if you're using something like AWS Autoscaler groups, that you have an application level health check set up so that the machines aren't added to the autoscale group to the load balancer until they actually become healthy.
Okay, cool. All right, that's kind of all the questions on that. I think that's fairly clear. I mean, that's something that you really just have to play around with. If you have your own provisioning scripts that trigger deployments in Octopus and things like that, those are almost redundant now after 3.4.
Yeah, we certainly like to hear about situations where you still need custom scripting for some reason. We've certainly gone to a lot of effort to make sure that this is safe by default. But we really want it to become a real trusted part of your infrastructure. And so if I like to sleep at night time, and I like auto-scale events to happen at night time as well. And so we really want to make sure that Octopus has the right features and the right sort of algorithms built into it to help you sleep well at night.
Okay, cool. All right, so those are the main big ticket items. I suppose we used to call them the meat and Meat and two veg.
Yeah, meat and three veg.
Meat
Yeah.
and three veg. So we've got 2 meats and a whole lot of vegetables in this one. So some of the other things, and we saw a little bit of it before, was the deployment targets, and there's a new deployment target called the Cloud Region Deployment Target.
Yeah, that's right. And we use it a lot for demos and trialing out the auto deploys. Cloud targets are really just, well actually if I dial right back, when you set up a deployment to deploy step to certain roles, all that's doing is saying let's work at a higher abstraction than the machine itself. Otherwise, every time we'd add a machine, we'd have to go to every project where that machine should participate and add those machines in. So roles made a lot of sense as a way to work on aggregate machines. And if you boil it right down, literally Octopus is just doing a for loop over it. It says for each machine that matches this role, do this step. And so cloud regions are a way of adding a for loop that runs a step on the Octopus server. So that's sort of what we implemented. We really toyed around with the name because what we are trying to implement here is a way to say I want to introduce a new cloud region. So if we're using Azure as an example, when the Australian data centers got rolled out, I want to be able to deploy certain tenants or certain applications into the Australian data center, but I might also deploy to the US West region and somewhere in Europe. And so that was kind of where, back in Octopus 3.0 days, we designed the idea of a web app deployment target and a cloud service deployment target as a way to kind of meet this need. But we realized that sort of took away a lot of the fluidity that the cloud gives you. And so what we're doing here is adding a way back in that you can combine the Azure steps and add the idea of that for loop and say, do a rolling deployment to the entire world for my cloud app, and it would roll out to the Australia East data centre and then roll out to the US West data centre and then roll out to Europe, all as part of the same deployment.
Cool. So it's kind of that halfway point between the 3.0 version of an Azure deployment target and the current version of the deployment step, which talks about deploying to Azure.
Yeah, that's right, and allows you to enable those rolling deployments, kind of like you could before by adding roles to a deployment target.
Of course, the other thing is if you're not using Azure, if you're using AWS or something like that, could this be used kind of in line with the with deploying your infrastructure alongside your code? So, for example, spinning up a new something in the cloud and then deploying to it, and then and then tearing down the old ones or something.
Yeah, that's right. As I said, we sort of toyed around with the idea of making it a generic target or a server target, or it just became really hard to come up with a name that wasn't confusing. But really, it just is that for each loop that lets you run things on the Octopus server instead of an actual endpoint. And so that could be a PowerShell script, it could be a Bash script or an F# script nowadays, C# script, it could provision some infrastructure in a cloud vendor for you. It could run just a calculation script on your server as part of your deployment.
Awesome. Cool. So that's kind of the cloud region. That fills that gap, I guess, that we were there. That we had there, sorry. One of the other things in terms of deployment targets is proxy support, or increased proxy support, I guess, for Tentacle communications. So previous to 3.4, I believe you could set up Tentacles with proxies for some things, but not the communication between the server and the Tentacle. Is that correct?
Yeah, proxies are an interesting thing because which proxy I'm going to use depends on what I'm trying to do. And we have a lot of competing concerns and a bit of tension we find in some complex security deployments of Octopus. And so what we found was that in certain cases you want a proxy that allows you to get from a Tentacle out to the World Wide Web or to one of your cloud vendors to do some things, and then you need another proxy for your Octopus server to get out to the World Wide Web. Maybe that's to let us know how you're using Octopus so we can improve Octopus and make it better for you. But one of the things that we haven't supported up till now is the ability to go through via a proxy for the Octopus to Tentacle connection, or the Octopus via SSH connection to a Linux endpoint, for example. And so now you can explicitly do that. Down to the point, and I'll just show you this quickly, if it's a listening tentacle, for example, or a connection to an SSH proxy, endpoint, so it's an outbound connection from the Octopus server, you can now in the environments area add any number of proxies you want to, because you might have different proxies to get to different endpoints. And so once you've added those proxies, you can then go target by target and choose which proxy to use. And so we haven't got a proxy there at the moment, but yeah, you certainly can go and use the same proxy for everything, or you can choose a different proxy per endpoint. And again, when you register your Tentacle, you can register it to use a particular proxy as well. Okay. And for listening tentacles, the same exact principle applies, but you do that configuration not in Octopus, but on the Tentacle, because the connection is initiated from Tentacle itself. Okay,
awesome. Cool. So that's going to fix a couple of network issues for some people as well, hopefully. We're getting close to the end, so I want to touch on a couple of other things. So one of the little things we added, and we did a blog post about this, was support for F# scripts. Mm-hmm. So we have PowerShell, we have script CS, and we have Bash, obviously, if you're looking at an SSH endpoint. But we now also support F# if you want to do some functional scripting.
Yep, and the nice thing is that there's some good blog sites around, we link to those in the blog posts, that basically show you what you can do with F# as far as infrastructure and deployments go. And basically the short answer is anything you can do with PowerShell or C# you can do with F#. Yep. But one of the things that people really love about F# is that sort of that terseness in the language, but also the explicitness you get from how you can express concepts like optional values, and that works really well with Octopus variables, and there's some examples of those in our documentation. And just really quickly to prove that we haven't sort of tricked anybody, one of the things you can do with Octopus is this concept of an Hoc Script with a script console. So you go into the task pane, and we need to make this more discoverable in my opinion, but you can choose a target here and say let's run a script on a target. And so you might say across all my production nodes I want to run a script to analyze something, and you might want to do that with F# today, and yeah, we do that for you.
Cool. So what else have we got? Any more questions? No, nothing yet. What else do we have? So Semver 2 and NuGet 3 support. So let's talk about NuGet 3. Actually, no, let's talk about NuGet, Semver 2, because somebody specifically just asked about it.
There you go.
So Semver 2 is really just about the versioning of your packages, right?
It's actually packages and releases, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and so since the very beginning, Octopus took a dependency on NuGet as a package format, and there were some really good reasons for that. And you'll see in later releases of Octopus, I think it was around 3.3, we introduced the idea of zip packages or tar.gzs and a few other package formats, and you could easily see this expanding into newer package formats as well for different reasons. But along with the NuGet dependency came a dependency on sort of NuGet's interpretation of Semver at the time, and so it's taken us a fair while to do to sort of dot all the I's and cross all the T's as far as how invasive NuGet and then Semver was in Octopus, and so it sort of touched lots and lots of places. But yeah, now we can proudly say that across the board we know exactly where our dependencies are on NuGet and Semver, and it's Semver 2 across the board, which we shouldn't go into a really big explanation about Semver, but as a really fast demo, one of the things that we like to do is use the versioning. We use Git version as a way to help us sort of predictably create version numbers for our releases. And so here's just a quick teaser of a few features all in one little hit. Using channels, we've created a beta program for our tenants. And what we've done here is tenants can leak into channels really well or interact with channels really well, in that this will only deploy beta releases with matching that match the sort of package filter rules based on Semver 2 now, if the tenants have been marked with this special 2.x beta tag. And so if we go in and create a release that matches that in the 2.x beta, we can say something like 2.0.0-beta.1 plus SHA dot some SHA and recognize exactly what commit that was against if we want to. And so now I've got this release here. If I go back to my overview and choose that release, I can see that that is flowing all the way through, and now I can deploy it to my dev environment, and that should go through in a couple of seconds. And once I've done that, now I can see that that for releases, and I haven't done an example of packages, but packages flow through the same way. If I choose that release again and have a look at only grouping by early access program, I can see all of the testers here that are part of the early access program that I can deploy to, and you can extrapolate that through our customers. So Semver2 and our tagging and channels will sort of interact nicely. The last call out I'll make is that inside our channel version rules, those are now Semver2 as well. And so one of the big changes with Semver2 is that the sort of sorting and ordering of semantic versions has really been fixed. And now you can do things like this, where you say, I want to have all of my versions from 2.0.0-alpha.1 all the way through to the full release of 2.0.0 in the version range. And before you had to use regex in your tags, and so we sort of see over time people are going to use less regex on their tags and just use more of this sort of use it NuGet version range syntax to set up rules around their channels.
Okay, cool. Just responding to a couple of questions privately, but there's a couple of questions around deployments as well. So I might, because we've moved on from deployments and multi-tenant deployments and things, I might answer them separately. But so Semver2, the implications really are that there's a couple of nice side effects, right? Like, you know, if you have a beta 1 version and a beta 2 version, or you know, a beta 10 version versus a beta 2 version, those can be ordered.
Yeah, they'll be ordered properly now.
Yeah, that's cool.
Instead of ordinally. Yeah. So lexicographic ordering is working.
Yep, cool. So the other part, which is kind of related to that, is support for NuGet 3.
Yep.
Vaguely related, I suppose.
Yeah, vaguely related. So all of our ecosystem now works with NuGet 3. So if you end up pushing packages with NuGet 3, creating packages with NuGet 3, using Octopack uses, I'm going to say caveat, a slightly patched version of NuGet 3, because NuGet 3 doesn't pack using Semver2 yet. And we think one of the main reasons for that is because NuGet.org doesn't support Semver2 yet. And there's a lot of knock-on effects of that. So we've sort of taken that safety guard off for Octopack, but it still uses good old NuGet 3.4.3, I think it is now. And yeah, all across the board, our ecosystem supports NuGet 3 as far as external feeds, use the NuGet 3 libraries, which has fixed a few long-standing handle leak bugs and things like that we've had as well. Yeah. And so we should see those closed out now as well.
Yep, cool. All right, so there's a couple of other things. There's a couple of questions I'm still answering when I get to. A couple of little gems when we were talking about these last night. There's a couple of other little things that you pointed out. You know, it'd be nice to show this. The health check, which happens regularly. We have a new step type.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Doing a health check.
Yep. So as an example, if we go back to the demo server where I was starting to set up our web server autoscale, so we'll go in here. If you know that your servers are generally available, I was saying you can dial up the amount of time between health checks, routine health checks. But as part of your process now, you can add a health check step. Here we go. And we'll just check health. And you can choose across which roles, so we'll say web server, and you can choose at this point in time whether to do a connection-only test or a full health check, which will invoke the entire script. And you can choose what to do as a result of it. So if there's a health check, do we want to fail a deployment, or do we just want to consider, because that machine is not actually available right now, we're just going to skip it and then deploy with the targets that are actually detected as available. And another thing you can do, which has been a bit of a bugbear for people over a while, is now you can combine infrastructure steps that might stand up new tentacles as part of the same deployment that actually deploys the software onto them as well. Because now you can say perform a connection test, skip any targets that are not available right now, but also include any new deployment targets into the deployment. So you can sort of add this health check step at different parts of your deployment process and decide what to do with the results. And so one of the nice things there is you could start a deployment with no machines, and then as a result of certain steps in a deployment, detect new machines that have come online and then continue to deploy to those machines now that they're online.
Cool. Awesome. I think, so that's pretty cool as well. One of the other things which we didn't go into is and I think you're already there, the
variables tab.
Yes. So we get a lot of questions about variables being a little bit difficult to manage once they start to mount up. If you have lots and lots of variables for your project that are scoped to all sorts of different things, environmental machines and things like that, it can get a little bit unwieldy. We've improved that a little bit with project variable templates and common variable templates and things like that. But this is how you see all of the variables.
Yeah, we realise that variables are getting complex, and we see certain customers have thousands of variables in their projects, and that's sort of hard to deal with. And so we're trying to help you be able to spread those variables out and put them where they belong. But as you split those out, they're no longer in one place where you can see them. Well, they are, because we've built this sort of inspector in a way, and so we've got more plans for this over time to make it easy to use and give you more sort of information. One of the main bits of information that people often want is I've got the same variable with the same a variable with the same name defined in multiple places, and there is a precedence rule set. It's sort of like CSS specificity, and so it'd be nice to be able to sort of show under the covers. The other thing that'd be really nice to do is something along the lines of do a what if kind of analysis. If I deployed to this tenant, this project, to this environment, and these deployment targets, what would the variables look like? And at the moment, you actually have to run a deployment to do that introspection and log those variables as a diagnostic log. Whereas now, at least in this version, you can sort of see up front what the resultant variables are going to be, not in a what-if scenario, but across the board. And so in here, one of the lesser-known features is you click that little button and you can go and filter. So you can actually say what source you want it to come from. So I want to look at all of Lydia's variables, or I might want to show certain scopes, so any variable scope to the test environment, and that'll show those.
Yep. Cool. Sorry, I'm just trying to answer a few questions.
Flurry of questions, yeah.
Yeah, flurry of questions. Can we see in the audit log, so this is from David, why can we see in the audit log when a variable's changed? That's a good question.
I think so. I think it's most or all data.
Yeah, I think
it might not be at that granularity.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure. I'm fairly sure the audit log does show all changes, but it will be a change to the deployment process itself. It's just in the JSON, it will have new JSON, I believe.
Yeah, that's right. So if we go from there into our audit log, you can see that the variables are changed, and you can also see that that value was added in the JSON.
Yeah, so that's for a project variable. What about library variable?
The exact same process, yeah.
Cool. Yeah. Right. Cool.
And you'll have the same for tenants as well, so adding or removing tenant tags, changing tenant variables. Yeah.
And that all variables have a couple of questions about that. It's available regardless of whether you have the tenant stuff turned on.
Yeah,
right?
correct. Yeah,
Okay,
yeah, it's not a tenant feature. It just happens to have some tenant features inside.
Yeah, and it's a read-only bit of information, right? If you need to change that, you need to go into the source.
Yeah, so that's why I provided those source links there, so you can go in and it takes you straight to the right place.
Yep, and if you wanted to find out, what variables come from a particular source, you can filter. You can use this filter.
Yeah, you can use that filtering and sorting there. Yep.
Okay. Cool. All right. I think we've got like 1 minute left of our time. We had one other just random question as well from Max about what we use for event sourcing. We've rolled our own.
Oh, look, it's just a schedule that runs over our audit log. There's nothing super fancy about it, but it is smart about bookmarking and a few of those things to keep efficiency as sort of a number one concern.
Cool. Yeah, we do have a bit of a few scheduled tasks that run periodically for health checks and looking at tasks that are up and running as well. So we don't have anything else embedded in there, I don't think, unfortunately.
Depending on what's flying through, I do have sort of one quick demo that pulls everything together and shows a different scenario that has Elastic and Transient environments sort of married up with multi-tenancy, which might be interesting to some people. Takes about 5 minutes. I don't know whether we've got other questions or whether you want me to run through that.
I don't think, there's one more. Filtering, sorry, just quickly, filtering's been available for quite a while, hasn't it? Even since version 2.
Yeah, it has. Yeah, just it's sort of one of those lesser known little nuggets that people often don't realise.
Kind of hides behind a few other things. Yeah, I don't think there's any other questions. I'll keep answering them, so we'll keep this open for a little bit longer after, in case there are any last minute questions as well. But yeah, is there anything else you wanted to show before we just?
No, I think that's pretty much it. There probably are lots of things that we've skipped out on, lots of little features that we've added through the period. But yeah, just read our release notes for any breaking changes that are there. We've tried to be as backwards compatible as we can be, but there are some things to note.
Yeah, so I'm just going to grab that quickly just to share a little bit more information. So this has jumped on my screen hopefully. So we did a blog series of a lot of different things that are in Octopus Deploy 3.4. We have an announcement blog post as well, and it's one of the shortest blog posts we've done. But importantly, it has links to that blog series, so you can drill into a lot of those details. It has links to some of the documentation around these features as well. And we'll add some links to this webinar as well if you wanted to look at that later. For anything we haven't answered as well, please don't hesitate to contact us on the support channels as well. We do answer them pretty regularly, or very, very regularly. Generally, you'll get an answer within 24 hours, business hours that is. And remember, we're in Australia as well, so we have Delmiro sorting people out in the US and Argentinian time zones. So yeah, we will get an answer to you very quickly. So if there's anything we haven't answered, please contact us on support. But if that's all we have, I think we might wrap that up. So just a reminder as well, this recording will be made available shortly, hopefully today, if I can get things in order. And we will speak to you later. Until then, happy deployments.
Happy deployments.